Hello, welcome to Little Literati. I'm Jess, and I am so sorry that it is already the middle of July and I have not yet published my June wrap-up video or my July TBR. I do have a couple of excuses for that. The last week of June, my brother-in-law brought his family to town unexpectedly for a week, and so we kind of had to drop a lot of the things we had planned so that we can spend time with them, and we had a lot of fun, but that kind of ate up a large part of that week. And then that weekend, on the 2nd, my middle daughter turned 5, and so we had a big extravaganza for her. And then, of course, there was the 4th. So that kind of excuses me up to a point, but I really have no good excuse for the past week and maybe a half about not getting this out. I just haven't gotten around to it, so I'm really sorry about that, but I am here now. So thank you for being patient, and let's get started. So in the month of June, I actually read 17 books. They're not all here, and I will explain why when I get to that, but let's go ahead and jump in because I don't want this to be a half hour long. So I actually finally did get around to reading The Phantom of the Opera this month. I listened to part of it, and I also read part of it, and at some point I was actually reading along while the narrator was reading it to me, and my husband thought that was really ridiculous that I was reading along. He said, why don't you just either listen or read? Because it was fun, and it was actually the same translation, so that was really a lot of fun. So I did enjoy The Phantom of the Opera. I had read this several years ago, and so it was really great to revisit the story and not just focus on the musical music or the movie, but I do really enjoy the book, and so this was really a lot of fun to read, especially as an adult, so that I can understand a lot more of the motivations of Eric than I did as a teenager. So that was a really lot of fun to read The Phantom. This is a reread. In fact, several of these are rereads. I'm so sorry, but yay for audiobooks! I actually listened to Written and Read this month. I was getting a lot of housework done and getting ready for parties and so planning and things like that, and so I listened to several of the books I already owned on Audible, and so I re-listened to Written and Read, and you can see a video several months back about how much I loved this book and ranted and raved about it forever. So Written and Read was a reread. I finally read several that had been on my list for a couple of months now, and one of those was East, which is a retelling of the fairy tale East of the Sun, West of the Moon. And this one jumps points of view every chapter or so. And so we get Rose is the main character, the girl, and a very big deal is made about her name and what direction her mother was facing when she was born, because the direction you're born affects your personality in this, sort of. At least that's what their parents believe. And then there's also the viewpoint of her brother, there's the viewpoint of the bear, there's the viewpoint of the troll queen. And it was really pretty fun reading this adaptation of the story. My one small quibble is that all of these points of views are first person. And so we pretty much get to read the Troll Queen's account of everything kind of hitting the fan at her wedding feast, like up until about 3 seconds before all of the trolls get wiped out. And so I was kind of left thinking, well, how on earth did we get her record of this then, since she obviously didn't have time to write this down or to tell it to anybody or record this in any way? So how are we seeing her thoughts moments before she dies if at the very beginning it's like the author is finding records in a trunk of all these different people? How did she get the Troll Queen's account? I don't know, that was one small quibble, but overall it was a really fun story, and I really enjoyed the adaptation. Reminded me a lot of the story of my childhood that I had grown up reading. This is The Princess and the Hound. Finally got around to reading this one as well. This is Beauty and the Beast retold, except that the Beast is a woman, and so the princess is actually the Hound. And so the man has to try to fall in love both with the woman that he sees, and then he is also having dreams of the woman who's inhabiting the body of the dog. And so he has to kind of reconcile, he's supposed to marry the woman, but is he really in love with her? Is he kind of more attracted to the dog, which of course raises other issues. But overall I thought this was also a pretty fun story. Definitely more of a young adult middle grade read, but it was still pretty fun to read. So that was The Princess and the Hound. This is The Masked City. It was the sequel to The Invisible Library. I know that there are at least 2 more books in the series. I will eventually get around to reading those. And I did enjoy this one. In this one, instead of focusing on the world that we settled in the first book, we have to travel to a world far off on the chaos extreme of the spectrum. And so that causes a lot of problems, and I mean, one of the characters is physically dying because the atmosphere is anathema to him. And so there's, of course, conflict being raised there between the dragons and the fairy. And overall, I really enjoyed this. I don't know, there were some characters I just didn't like and couldn't really connect with very well. And I was kind of wondering how one character ended up where he did, since, I mean, it kind of explains it, but I just have a hard time seeing him make it all the way to the opposite extreme of the universe without any help or without any clue what the heck he was doing. But he does somehow, and so it all gets resolved in time for the 3rd book to start. And it kind of ends on a cliffhanger because we don't really know what's going to happen to Irene in the next book. So I will have to read this sooner rather than later. But The Masked City, I didn't like it quite as much as I liked The Invisible Library. I don't really know why I didn't like it as much. I did like it, I just wasn't as in love with it as I liked The Invisible Library. So we'll see what happens with the 3rd book and then the 4th book. And I don't know if she's going to write more than that. I probably should look it up. But I did get around to reading this one. I also finally read Jane. And I had mentioned several times that this book was making me nervous because Jane is very near and dear to my heart. And so having a modern adaptation of it being made me nervous because I was afraid they were going to ruin it. Overall, I was actually pleasantly surprised. I thought they did a fairly decent job with translating the story to modern sensibilities. Again, I had another problem with this, and again, towards the end. So if you don't want to hear spoilers, go ahead and plug your ears until I put the book down, I guess. Anyway, at the end, if you've read Jane Eyre, you know the major plot twist is Bertha living in the attic. And if that's a spoiler to you, I mean, the book's been around for 150 years, so kind of shame on you. You should know this by now, but whatever. So Bertha living in the attic, the wife living in the attic, is still a problem in this. But given our modern societal leniency about divorce, I was a little worried about how they were going to approach that, and really I wasn't as satisfied with their reasoning. It's not that he can't divorce Bertha, like he can't in the original novel. It's that he doesn't want to because he keeps holding out hope that she's going to get better, that she's going to take her meds and she's going to come back to him the way he remembered her. Yet, he doesn't want to give up hope while he is still pursuing and wanting to marry Jane. And I get, up to a certain point, if you don't want to give up, I totally respect that. Trying to make it work when all odds are against you, I totally have, you have my respect and you have my support. But once he knew that he was willing to move on with Jane, I feel like he should have immediately nipped the first relationship in the bud instead of trying to string them both along. So it wasn't quite as crucial and kind of clenching of a dispute as it was in the first or in the original book, because it could have so easily been fixed and it wouldn't have been a problem, which I get means that it wouldn't have been the same story as the original, but it just didn't seem as much of a real problem that was compelling as the first book. So overall I did enjoy it. I thought they did a very good job. She did a very good job modernizing it. That one aspect just wasn't quite as awesome as I had hoped it would be. So anyway. But of course, nothing's ever going to live up to my original beloved novel. So this is Stars Above. This is not actually an individual narrative book like the rest in the Lunar Chronicles series. This is a compendium of short stories. I think there are 9 of them in here. And so this is just tells little snippets. A lot of them are actually prequels to the books. And so we get to see kind of the origin stories of several of the main characters of the series. There was one or maybe two that took place after the events of the main books, but I thought this one was really pretty fun. I was really glad that they had a standalone story in here, which was the adaptation of The Little Mermaid, which was The Little Android, I think is what it was called. And I'd read it actually maybe online a couple of years ago. But it was just, it's kind of nice to have it included in this hard copy version so that I can reread it, because I like fairy tale retellings, if you haven't noticed over the past several months of this vlog. And so I just kind of like having that little extra gem in my collection. So I did enjoy Stars Above, and I thought the ending story was really, really sweet. And it was just kind of fun to see backstories, but none of it was really new or surprising because, again, they were mostly prequel stories telling how characters ended up where they were at the beginning of the series. But it looks pretty, and it was definitely satisfactory. So, Stars Above. This is actually another retelling that I listened to on my Audible account. This is Beauty and the Clockwork Beast. I read this last year and loved it because it is Beauty and the Beast meets Jane Eyre, plus steampunk, and plus vampires and werewolves, and it was just, I loved it when I first read it. And then I reread it, and it was still just as awesome, and I still loved it, and I've been semi-stalking the author. Sorry about that, Mrs. Allen. But I've been trying to see, because this is on Goodreads listed as the steampunk proper romance, book number 1, so I keep waiting for book number 2 to even get announced. And I finally, after weeks of stalking the author, I came across an Instagram post where she was giving a little hint, and she had taken a picture of Sleeping Beauty. She was watching the Disney version, and then she was like, and I'm researching for book number 2, and I was like, yes! So, I don't know when book number 2, which apparently is going to be based on Sleeping Beauty, is going to be coming out, but I'm excited, and I need it in my hands now, because I really enjoyed the way she, again, tackled the fairy tale aspect, plus the Victorian and steampunk ideas, and put them all together and made it a really, really fun read. So I'm excited to see what she can do with Sleeping Beauty, and I hope that she continues through several of the princess type fairy tales, because I think that'd be really fun to have a whole series of steampunk fairy tales. So I loved it again. And then the same author, I finally bought My Fair Gentleman, which is just a proper romance, not a steampunk proper romance, but it's in that same line of books. And this one was a lot shorter than I expected. It's a lot more narrow. But I finally bought this and read it. And I will be honest, several months ago, when I was stalking Goodreads to see when the second steampunk book was going to be coming out, and I saw that she had announced a new book, and I went, yay, the second book's coming out. And then I read the synopsis, and I was like, oh, well, it has nothing to do with these characters or this premise at all. It's just another proper romance book. Boo hiss. Well, I read this, and then I reread the synopsis for the new book that's coming out, which is The Secret of the India Orchid. And actually, one of the characters in here is kind of a spin-off, so it's going to be about her and her relationship. So I'm excited to see where that goes, actually. I'm hoping it'll actually sort of be smallish, or I don't care what length that is. But I also hope that one's coming out, I think, in September. And so I'm also hoping that this one can come out, the second book can come out, or at least be announced by the end of the year. But I am actually more excited for that now that I have read My Fair Gentleman. And this one was a fun little gender swap on the My Fair Lady idea. And in fact, my daughter can read, obviously, very well. And she saw this on my shelf of my finished titles for the month, and she said, oh, it's My Fair Gentleman. Are they going to come out with a book called My Fair Lady? I said, they already have. It's called Pygmalion, and then they've made a movie off of it called My Fair Lady. She's like, oh, I need to read that. I said, well, give it a couple years. But My Fair Gentleman was really pretty cute and silly and just overall fun. But I want the second steampunk book. If you're watching this, which I know you aren't, but I want it out this year. I need it in my hands. I reread Wrath and the Dawn, and The Rose and the Dagger books last month while I was recovering from my eye surgery, which was a fantastic success, by the way. I love it so much. You can't base it on my eyes right now because I've been up till 4:30 for the past 4 nights in a row, so my eyes are a little bit tired and pink, but it has nothing to do with surgery. It's just me not being a responsible adult during the summer vacation. So anyway, I reread these. I was going to listen to them, but I don't know what it was, but the audiobook version was really annoying me. And so I just read them because my eyes were great the next day, so I could see really well. And so I just read them instead. But I really enjoyed them again. I was a little nervous when I was getting close to reading them. I was like, oh, I wonder if they're not going to be as good the second time around, since I'm not swept up in that world right now. I've had several months of a cooling off period, and so what if they're just not as good? And they were. I really, really enjoyed them the second time around as well. So it put me in the mood to read her new book, Flame in the Mist, which was not as much of a Mulan story as I had been led to believe by all of the raving on the internet about it. So, I mean, she dresses up as a boy and she infiltrates an army camp, or not an army camp, a camp of men, but that's kind of where the similarities end. And it was kind of hard to know what was really going on and who was who in this book, because it's like every single person that we meet is a bad guy for somebody, and we don't know exactly whose motives are actually the best overall, because everyone is kind of behaving in and the ends justify the means type mentality, and so everybody's kind of behaving despicably to everybody else just to get their own ends forwarded. And so people that I was like, okay, great, I'm totally rooting for this person, like up until the last chapter. And I was like, oh, well, all of a sudden you're kind of a scumbucket, aren't you? Yeah, I don't think I like you actually, but I don't like the other person either that you did that to, so I don't know who to root for now. And this is not a standalone book. There's going to be at least another book in this series because it ends on a cliffhanger. I don't know how many books she's planning on writing in this series. It just really was hard for me to know who to root for, which kind of separated me a little bit from connecting with this book as much as I had hoped I would, because I really, really cared about the characters in her first series, and so I didn't quite care as much about the characters in this book just because I couldn't relate to them and I couldn't really get behind their motives because I wasn't clear on what their motives actually were. So, I don't know. I will read the second book when it comes out, but I wasn't as in love with this as I wanted to be, which is too bad. Alright, the next 3 books I'm going to be talking about, because I checked the other ones that aren't here, were the Daughter of Smoke and Bone series by Laini Taylor. And I listened to these from my library because I couldn't get them from the library fast enough. So now, of course, I have them. But I didn't read them, I listened to them. Well, actually, I was reading along again with the narrator with Dreams of Gods and Monsters, which, again, my husband thought was ridiculous, but I thought it was kind of fun. I loved this series. I really, really did. It was so epic, is the best adjective I can come up with. It was so epic. The world was epic. The characters were so much larger than life and yet so real and down to earth, especially Susanna. I feel like we would be best friends, and if she was real, I would totally want to hang out with her because she's awesome. And then Karoo I could also be friends with Karoo, and I don't know, I loved this, and it was so imaginative and so beautiful and lush, and the magic system was brilliant, and the whole idea of reincarnation, and it literally took me until the 3rd book when they're describing what's his name? Sorry, the other. So Karoo's previous life, her previous body, she was starts with a K. It's driving me crazy. Anyway, her species. And then she has one last member of her species that she's friends with. And the humans see his body. And you see it from the perspective of humans. And they had described her, when she was Madrigal. They had described her body to me, and that was fine in the first book. But it took me until the third book when they were describing him, this other member of her species who he's died, and they're looking at his body. It took me until then when they were describing it, and they're talking about his hooves, and they're talking about his horns, and they're talking about everything, and they're like, he looks like a devil, but he's beautiful. I'm like, oh my gosh, he really is. Her species and his species really do look like our human imaginings and our illustrations of the devil and demons with the horns and the cloven hooves. And it took me 2.5 books to finally click that together, because they kept saying in the prequels, or the little, what is it called, the epigraphs, before each chapter, once upon a time, an angel and a devil did X. And I was like, okay, great. Yeah, I get that that's how the angels see the Chimera, is as devils. But it took me until the third book to realize, no, they literally look like our definition of devils. And yet, they are these beautiful creatures. And it just really, I was like, I feel smart, and yet at the same time, I feel so blonde for not having grabbed the connection before. But I was glad I finally did. And I really, really love these books. My one problem with the books, well, the last 100 pages of the third book kind of took everything in a whole new direction, and I feel like that would have been better explored in another series or another book to kind of flesh it out, because it's just like all of a sudden something else happens and we suddenly have a much larger conflict that we're not going to have time to resolve in the given space and time and with the characters allotted. So that was kind of out of nowhere, but it all kind of still worked together and concluded nicely. My other problem with this series is that the US versions are creepy as heck. I mean, look at these creepy eyes staring at me from the spine. I do not want these staring at me from my bookshelf, especially because I have most of the books I really, really love up on a bookshelf in my bedroom. And so if I turn the light off, I don't really want creepy eyes staring at me from the dark. Especially the one on Dreams of Gods and Monsters. Like, that's straight up evil looking at you from the cover in the spine. So I did not want to buy the US versions of these books because they are creepy and I don't like them. And I mean, they kind of fit the theme and the tone of the books, but I have a thing about eyes in the dark and mirrors, and it's a phobia of mine. Anyway, I don't want these staring at me from the dark. So I actually ended up ordering the UK versions in paperback, and I will be showing those in my book haul video, which I will be doing in the not too far distant future. But that was like my main gripe with these. So there were 2 other books that I was not able to get hard copies of for this video, which I was kind of sad about. One of them was called Rhapsodic by Laura Thalassa. Anyway. And so I actually, again, I was listening to several things on Audible, and it kept popping up as a recommendation based on the books that I had been reading and had been listening to. And so I was like, sure, I'll give it a try, whatever. And so I don't have a hard copy of it, but I listened to it. It was okay. I will eventually want to read or listen to the second one, but it wasn't as engrossing as I thought some of the others that were the impetus for it being recommended were. So there was that. I also, by Laini Taylor, read on my Kindle, or on my phone, but the Kindle app, Lips Touch 3 Times, which were 3 short stories about supernatural kisses. Which I kept seeing this cover and the title. I'm like, that is the stupidest sounding thing I've ever heard in my life. But after having read Strange the Dreamer and then having read the Daughter of Smoke and Bone series, I decided to give it a try. And I'm so glad I did. And I will eventually be buying this in a hard copy sometime because the stories were really a lot of fun. The first one was called Goblin Fruit, and a modern version of the Goblin Fruit poem by Christina Rossetti. And I read that in college and thought it was I really enjoyed it in college. We of course analyzed it and talked about the symbolism of but of repression for women and in that time period, and the all the symbolism of the fruit, and I really enjoyed it then too. And just the poem on its own merits I thought was really, really well done. So this one was a modern teenage girl who is being hunted by the goblins. And her grandmother is actually the sister who saves the main character in the original poem. And so I thought that was really a fun nod to the original. And it ends really ambiguously. And so it was very much a Lady and the Tiger type ending. And if you haven't read that, again, shame on you. You should totally go read it because it's awesome. The next book was called Spicy Little Curses Such as These. And this one was about this demon in hell and his opposite counterpart. And this old lady leads and they have to negotiate for souls. And so he takes great delight in taking innocent souls from children and from people who have done no wrong. And so she has to negotiate and try to get the innocent souls of children back up and give them life. But in return, he needs souls. And so she tries to negotiate and give him serial killers and people who have done mass wrong to many people. And of course, he doesn't want to give her the innocence. And so there's this big wager that they have. And so at the very beginning, he comes to her and says, fine. We had this big earthquake. All these children were covered and died in this earthquake. I will give you all of the children, all of them, for free, except that you have to allow one person of my choosing to have this curse upon them, that if she ever speaks, if she ever makes any noise whatsoever, everyone within hearing distance will die immediately. And so the woman has to think really long and hard, and she finally decides to agree. And so she places this curse on this baby girl. And fortunately, she tells the baby girl, and other servants hear her. And this takes place in India around the turn of the century. And so this girl grows up hearing the curse and doesn't want to risk it. And yet she has this beautiful voice. It's the most beautiful voice, and that's part of the curse. It's the most beautiful voice anyone will have ever heard, except that she can't use it because it will kill the family and her friends around her. And so there's this intrinsic conflict that she has to try to live with because she falls in love with this man. She wants to tell him she loves him. She wants to say I do at their wedding. And yet she doesn't want to kill him by saying I do or that I love you. And I loved it. I thought it was a beautiful little story. And then the third story was called Hatchling. And this one was based in Zoroastrian mythology. So there are the demons who take the form of wolves. And the queen of the wolves has, or the queen of the demons has no soul. That's the whole point. Demons have no souls. And the queen has been farming out and raising her own human pets in a vicious cycle that goes on and on. So she raises these babies from infancy up until they get to the age of puberty. And they're like her pets, and she loves them, and they are caressed and cosseted and just absolutely pampered in every way. And then when they get to be the age of puberty, then she possesses them and lives life through their bodies because it's as close to living as she can feel. And then when they get old enough, she breeds them. She invades them and possesses them and breeds a new replacement that she can then do the same thing over and over again. And so there's this demon who has kind of patched together himself a soul with bits and pieces of... Read the story. It's really, really good. But similar to the patched together soul, all of these three stories have these patched together elements that are just beautiful and that I recognize from fairy tales from my childhood. And yet they're not in the same sequence. They're not in the same context that they are that I grew up with, but they're just pieced together into this beautiful, beautiful tapestry of images and story, like a cohesive story that is just absolutely stunning. And it's one of those things, I resent the fact that I couldn't come up with it because it's so perfect. It's all of the beautiful pieces, the gems of all these things that piece together make something even more wondrous. And so I really resent the fact that I didn't come up with it, but on the other hand, I totally appreciate what she has been able to put together with all these different pieces that I really, really loved. And so I'm definitely going to be buying a copy because it was really a fun read. And it's not a very long read either. It only took me a couple of hours to read through everything. But Lips Touched 3 Times, definitely on my to-buy list. So hopefully soonish I'll be putting that in a TBR video as well, or in a book haul video. So those were the 17 books that I read in the month of June. Sorry, this is going to be a very long video. I apologize for that. On the other hand, 17 books. Takes a while to get through. So I hope that you read a lot of really great books in June. I would love if you could leave comments below telling me what it is that you read. What would you recommend? Have you read any of these? Did you like them? Were you as obsessed with some of these as I was? Were you kind of ambivalent about your feelings on some? Please let me know. If you have any recommendations that I should read, also let me know those. I would love to find out what I should be reading in the coming months and what you are obsessed with and what you would love to share with me. So thank you so much for your patience in waiting for this video to come up and for staying with me. And I hope that you have read good books this summer, and I look forward to reading more fun books with you in the coming months. So thank you so much.